Steve Sharpe with his speech, Aunt Minnie. Steve Sharpe.
One afternoon, my mother picks me up from school, but instead of heading towards home, we turn and head west towards Main Street. I'm not happy because this can only mean one thing. We're going to visit Aunt Minnie. She's an old lady and she doesn't even have any kids for me to play with. But much worse than that, she doesn't even have a TV set. I mean, really, who doesn't have a television? When the Civil War ended, the South was left in a shambles. Many farms, businesses, and homes had been destroyed. Beyond that, many able-bodied men were killed, and those that weren't killed came home not quite so able-bodied. If you didn't know it, the Civil War was when doctors acquired the colloquial term sawbones because of all the limbs that were amputated. Around 1880, in the South, in the region called the Piedmont, which stretched from Virginia down through western and North Carolina and South Carolina into Georgia and Alabama, textile mills began to pop up. They came to dominate that region of the South, and by 1920, more Southerners worked in textile mills than in virtually any other occupation. It was against this backdrop that Minnie Stedding was born in 1886. Although I knew her as Aunt Minnie, she was actually my mother's aunt. Sometime between 1910 and 1920, her father and her transitioned from being farmers, farming a farm that they had rented, in other words, sharecroppers, to working in the mills. In the 1910 census, their occupation is listed as farmer and farmhand. In the 1920 census, they're listed as mill workers. There was scant economic opportunity for anyone back then, much less a woman. Mill work was very hard. Greenville, South Carolina was known as the textile capital of the world. 13 major mills grew up around Greenville, and these were huge, huge places. The mills were actually reckoned as far as size based on the number of spindles they had, which were where you put the thread, which would later be woven into a finished product. And I don't understand how that would exactly communicate to size, but some of these were very huge places. They were loud, they were noisy, they were hot during the summer and cold during the winter. The mill was the center of the community, but around the mill were houses for the workers. The mill owned these houses and built them and rented them to the workers. Another major feature of the community would have been the company store. At the company store, the workers could purchase groceries and other needs, and you could actually charge them, and it would be deducted for your pay. On payday, you would get your paycheck, and deducted from that would be the rent for your house, whatever you'd spend at the company store. And if there was anything left over, you would get it in the form of scrip, which could be spent at the company store. Now, if you had spent more than you earned, you just got a piece of paper with a little squiggle on it, and that was known as getting the worm. It sounds like it was probably a very rough and harsh existence. But when farm work went away, it was the only thing left for people, and they were probably very happy to get it. The mill sponsored sports teams. If you're a baseball fan, maybe you've heard of Shoeless Joe Jackson. He started out playing on a mill team in Greenville, South Carolina. One thing I know about Aunt Minnie is that she had a very disgusting habit. Aunt Minnie dipped snuff. If you don't know what snuff is, they would take the tobacco leaves and instead of making a cigar or cigarette, they would grind it up into a very fine powder, which you could either snort up your nose or more commonly place around your gum. This was not an unusual habit for women in the South. Instead of smoking, they would just apply the snuff. There's one byproduct of this. You have to spit. Coincidentally, Aunt Minnie never got married. I don't know why. I remember her house as being very small and dingy. There was a kitchen, a bedroom, and I remember the front porch had a railing, and when we visited during good weather, we would sit out there and talk. The thing I remember most, though, is there was a layer of soot. You can run your hand along the railing of the front porch and come up with a layer of soot. And that was because her heat was supplied by a coal stove. And this was in the 70s. Somebody living like that, I can't imagine. But everything around there kind of had this coating of soot. Well, it's finally time for us to leave. My mother and Aunt Minnie have been sitting talking. They talk about people I don't know, places I've never heard of, and things I don't understand. So I'm bored the whole trip. We get in the car and we're driving home, and I'm thinking about maybe I can get home in time to watch my favorite TV show. As we pull out through the area and go through west end of Main Street, as I was back there just a few weeks ago, the mill where Aunt Minnie worked has now been turned into lofts, and they command a very high rent from what I understand. The west end of town has been made into an area that is very trendy now with lots of little shops. I bet Aunt Minnie would have gotten a big laugh out of that. I wish I would have gotten to know her better, but I was just really too young to understand. Madam Toastmaster.